You expect us to believe a little girl is going to fuse a high-pressure industrial main?
Your father was Elias Jackson. Pack your things. You and your sister are leaving this graveyard today.
The three gang members crossed their arms, their laughter echoing off the cracked brick walls of the industrial yard. They pointed at Lola Jackson, a 20-year-old black woman covered in soot, holding a heavy-duty arc welding torch. You expect us to believe a little girl is going to fuse a high-pressure industrial main? The leader sneered, kicking a rusted steel beam. Lola didn't flinch. She just pulled her protective goggles down over her braids and fired up the torch. Sparks exploded outward, casting a brilliant, aggressive orange glow against the grimy street. She knew metal. She knew the exact temperature where steel surrendered. But what neither Lola nor the mocking gang knew was that the black SUV idling silently at the end of the block held Seung-Woo Lee, the city's most feared Korean Mafia boss. And as the gang's laughter reached its peak, Lee's polished leather shoe stepped out into the mud. The heavy thud of the car door shutting cut through the gang's laughter like a blade. Seung-Woo Lee walked forward, his crisp black shirt and tailored black suit a jarring contrast to the rusted scrap metal of the yard. Behind him walked a hulking bodyguard, his eyes scanning the perimeter. The local gang members froze, their smug smiles instantly fading into pale masks of terror. They recognized the intricate black tattoos peeking from Lee's collar. This was the Obsidian King. But Lee ignored the trembling thugs entirely. His cold, calculating eyes were fixed solely on Lola. He watched her hands move with the steady, flawless precision of a master craftsman, laying down a perfect stack of dimes weld on the pressurized pipe. He saw the battered brown jacket and recognized the incredibly rare, localized weaving technique, a specific, unbreakable weld he had only seen once before, 2 decades ago, from a man who had built the armored vault that kept him alive during a cartel shootout. Lola turned off the torch, wiping her forehead, unfazed by the sudden silence. Lee stepped into the light, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Your father was Elias Jackson," he stated, not asking. "Pack your things. You and your sister are leaving this graveyard today. Hello, family. Welcome back to Afro K Mafia DIARY. Before we proceed to the story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment section and also subscribe to this channel. Now, let's continue with the story." Lola Jackson wiped sweat and soot from her forehead, adjusting the heavy leather apron over her faded clothes. At 20 years old, she spent her days surrounded by mountains of rusting scrap metal in the city's poorest industrial yard. The deafening roar of machinery was the only lullaby she knew. Her father, Elias, had taught her that steel never lied. If it was weak, it shattered. If it was strong, it endured. Since his sudden death, Lola had to be the strong steel. She had to survive for her younger sister Mavis, who was waiting in their drafty, leaking apartment. Lola gripped her arc welding torch, feeling the familiar, heavy weight in her calloused hands. She was exhausted, hungry, and covered in grime, but she could not stop. Every spark that flew from her torch was a few more pennies to keep the lights on. She stared at the massive, cracked pipe in front of her. Oh, it was a dangerous job, but danger was just another part of her daily life now. The screech of tires interrupted Lola's focus as a dented truck slammed to a halt near her workstation. 3 men climbed out wearing heavy boots and smirking faces. They were the local street gang, known for terrifying the neighborhood and taking whatever they wanted. The gang leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his chin, pointed at Lola and erupted into cruel laughter. He mocked her dirty clothes and laughed at the idea of a young black woman trying to fix a high-pressure industrial pipe. He told her to drop the heavy tools and go play with dolls before she got herself killed. The other 2 men joined in, throwing rusted bolts at her boots and insulting her father's memory. Lola's heart pounded against her ribs. But she did not let her hands shake. She knew that if the pipe was not welded perfectly, the building's steam system would explode. She ignored their cruel jokes, pulled down her dark protective goggles, and squeezed the trigger of her torch, letting the bright fire speak for her. Suddenly, a sleek black SUV glided into the muddy yard, stopping right behind the laughing gang. The heavy doors opened, and Seung-Woo Lee stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that looked completely out of place in the filthy scrapyard. The gang leader turned around to yell, but the cruel smile instantly melted off his face. The gangsters recognized the intricate tattoos on Lee's hands. He was the Obsidian King, the most feared mafia boss in the entire city. The three men froze in absolute terror, dropping their heads and backing away like frightened dogs. Lee did not even look at them. His dark, cold eyes were locked entirely on Lola. Despite the terrifying sudden silence and the dangerous men standing just feet away, Lola never stopped working. She kept her torch steady, melting the steel with absolute perfection. The extreme heat blasted her face, but she smoothly fused the cracked pipe together under immense pressure. She finished the impossible weld, flipped up her goggles, and stared directly back at the dangerous mafia boss. Lee walked slowly toward the steaming metal, inspecting the silver seam Lola had just created. He reached out and touched the cooling steel with his bare hand. His cold expression shifted into a look of absolute shock. The pattern of the weld was a tight, flawless zigzag. It was the Jackson weave. It was a secret, unbreakable welding technique that Lee had only seen once in his entire life. 20 years ago, a kind man had used that exact same technique to build a hidden armored vault. That vault had saved Lee's life during a deadly shootout when everyone else had abandoned him. That man was Elias Jackson. Lee looked at the soot-covered girl standing proudly before him and immediately saw Elias in her tired but fierce eyes. A heavy, silent debt had weighed on Lee's soul for 2 decades, and now the universe had placed Elias's daughter right in front of him. She was struggling in the mud, using her incredible rare gift just to scrape by and survive another day. "You are Elias Jackson's daughter," Lee commanded, his voice deep and echoing across the quiet yard. Lola stiffened. I confused about how this terrifying stranger knew her beloved father. Before she could even ask a question, Lee turned to his massive bodyguards. He ordered them to find Lola's younger sister and pack whatever few belongings they had. He looked back at Lola and told her that her days of bleeding in this rusted graveyard were over. Within an hour, Lola and her sister were sitting inside the luxurious, air-conditioned SUV, completely terrified and confused. They were driven far away from the smog and poverty of their old neighborhood. The car finally stopped in front of a massive, glowing glass mansion located in a wealthy coastal city. The air smelled like fresh ocean salt instead of burning oil. Lee had paid off all their debts and forcefully dragged them into a sparkling, intimidating new world of extreme wealth. Lola stepped onto the pristine driveway, clutching her father's battered welding helmet tight against her chest. Lola woke up in a bed that felt too soft, wrapped in expensive silk sheets that made her skin crawl. The massive glass mansion was silent, lacking the comforting roar of diesel engines and grinding metal she had known her whole life. Everything in this new coastal city was perfectly clean, bright, and terrifyingly cold. Back in the industrial yard, the intense heat of her welding torch kept her grounded and focused. Here, the sterile white marble floors and empty hallways made her feel completely invisible. Mavis loved the fresh food and warm baths, but Lola felt like a trapped animal in a beautiful cage. She walked through the giant house, her heavy work boots squeaking awkwardly against the polished stone. She missed the dirt under her fingernails and the smell of melting steel. The extreme wealth of the elite felt like a heavy blanket suffocating her true identity. She did not belong in this untouchable world of quiet luxury, and the sharp contrast made her stomach twist with deep, unsettling anxiety. The sprawling campus of the elite structural engineering university looked like a modern art museum. Lola walked into the massive, echoing lecture hall, feeling small and completely out of place in her faded denim jacket. The room was filled with wealthy, privileged students wearing designer clothes and expensive watches. They casually tapped on glowing, advanced 3D modeling tablets, projecting perfect holographic blueprints into the air. Lola slowly took a seat in the back row, pulling her father's battered, grease-stained notebook from her backpack. The leather cover was torn, and the pages were filled with handwritten measurements and rough pencil sketches. A few students turned to stare at her, their eyes filled with silent judgment and cruel amusement. They whispered to each other, clearly wondering how a dirty blue-collar girl had snuck into their prestigious classroom. Lola gripped her cheap wooden pencil tightly, ignoring their sharp stares. She stared straight ahead at the chalkboard, desperately trying to prove to herself that she deserved to sit in this room full of brilliant, wealthy strangers. As the weeks passed, the crushing weight of the advanced mathematics began to pull Lola under. The arrogant professors spoke entirely in complex formulas, writing endless equations about molecular bonds and theoretical metallurgy on the board. Lola understood metal when she could feel it warping under her heavy torch, but these abstract numbers made absolutely no sense to her. In the real world, she knew exactly when a steel beam would snap just by watching the color of the heat. But in this cold classroom, the metal was just a tiny variable on a glowing computer screen. A dark, heavy cloud of imposter syndrome settled over her tired mind. She spent long nights staring at her textbooks until her eyes burned, feeling completely stupid and useless. The brilliant students around her solved the complicated equations in seconds, while she struggled to even understand the basic questions. She began to believe the cruel whispers of her classmates. She was just a poor welder from the mud, and she was failing. Seung-Woo Lee remained a terrifying ghost in the shadows of Lola's new life. He never visited her at the university or asked how she was feeling, but his powerful presence was everywhere. She noticed the dark, armored SUVs parked quietly near the library when she studied late at night. She saw the intimidating bodyguards standing near the campus gates, ensuring no one ever threatened her or her sister. Lee paid for every expensive textbook, every hot meal, and every piece of new clothing. But he offered absolutely no emotional comfort. He was a silent, calculating machine who only communicated through bank transfers and strict security protocols. Lola felt completely alone under his heavy, protective umbrella. She wanted someone to tell her she was doing a good job, or that her father would be proud of her hard work. Instead, she only had the chilling silence of the Obsidian King. He had given her a golden ticket out of poverty, but he expected total perfection in return, leaving her feeling completely isolated. The final breaking point happened during a crucial laboratory exam. Vance, a wealthy legacy student with a cruel smirk, purposely bumped into Lola's desk, scattering her father's handwritten notes across the floor. He laughed loudly, calling her a worthless junkyard rat who was dragging down the entire class. Humiliated and completely overwhelmed by the intense academic pressure, Lola ran out of the building. She marched straight to Lee's private office, throwing her heavy backpack onto his pristine desk. With tears of frustration burning her eyes, she demanded to quit, begging him to send her back to the dirty industrial yard where she belonged. Lee did not yell or move. He slowly stood up, looking down at her with cold, piercing eyes. He refused to let her run away from the difficult challenge. He pointed a steady finger at her shaking hands and told her to stop fearing the complicated numbers on the screen. He ordered her to remember her roots and told her to simply trust the fire. The next day in the advanced metallurgy lab, the arrogant professor projected a complex computer simulation on the giant screen. The digital model showed a glowing titanium joint slowly heating up under extreme pressure. The computer calculated that the metal would bend slightly but hold firm. The wealthy students quickly typed the expected results into their expensive tablets. Lola stared closely at the screen, on her dark eyes narrowing. She remembered the intense heat of her old welding torch and the harsh lessons her father taught her about exotic metals. She suddenly stood up, ignoring the confused stares of her classmates. She confidently told the professor that the computer was completely wrong. She explained that the titanium would not bend. It would loudly snap exactly at the center seam within 10 seconds. The professor rolled his eyes, but he started the physical test in the heavy glass chamber. Exactly 10 seconds later, a sharp, violent crack echoed through the silent room. The titanium joint shattered perfectly down the middle, leaving the arrogant professor staring at Lola in absolute shock. After that shocking day in the lab, a major shift happened in Lola's life. She stopped trying to read the thick textbooks faster than the wealthy students. Instead, she started treating the complicated metal alloys like living things with beating hearts. While Vance and his rich friends memorized endless charts and long math formulas, Lola spent her time in the physical workshop. She carefully ran her calloused fingers over cold steel bars, heavy iron plates, and delicate aluminum sheets. She understood the true soul of the metal. She knew exactly how the intense heat of a bright welding torch would stretch, pull, and permanently change the materials. When the difficult exams came, her answers were no longer just memorized numbers from a glowing computer screen. Her answers came from years of raw experience, burning sparks, and hard survival. She began to easily outshine every single privileged student in her difficult classes. Her grades climbed higher than anyone else's, slowly earning her a place of true respect in a world that originally wanted her to fail. Late one rainy evening, Lola was working alone in the university welding bay, surrounded by scattered tools and bright safety lights. The heavy metal door creaked open, and Seung-Woo Lee quietly stepped into the shadows. He did not bring his usual terrifying bodyguards, and his expensive suit was slightly damp from the cold rain. He stood silently by the doorway, watching Lola shape a difficult piece of strong steel with her bright torch. For the first time, the intimidating mafia boss did not look like a dangerous criminal. He looked incredibly tired and deeply haunted by his dark past. Lola pushed her heavy welding hood up and looked into his dark eyes. In that quiet moment, they shared a rare, silent connection. Lola finally understood why Lee had saved her from the dirty scrapyard. He was trapped in a cold world of crime and violence, and he desperately needed her unapologetic strength. He saw her honest, hard-working hands as his only chance to build something pure and earn a tiny piece of true redemption. The final semester arrived with a massive wave of crushing pressure. The university board announced the ultimate capstone project that would permanently decide the students' futures. Each senior student was assigned the incredibly difficult task of designing and building a revolutionary deep-sea pressure vessel. This heavy metal container had to survive the darkest, most dangerous depths of the freezing ocean without collapsing. It was not just a simple drawing on a computer screen, it was a physical test of absolute perfection. If a single weld was slightly weak, the crushing ocean pressure would instantly destroy the entire vessel. Lola stared at the massive pile of thick titanium plates delivered to her workbench. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. This was the exact moment she had been training for her entire life. She needed to combine the high-level science she learned in the pristine classrooms with the raw, gritty survival skills her father taught her in the mud. She picked up her father's old welding torch, feeling completely ready for the ultimate challenge. Vance watched Lola's incredible progress from across the brightly lit laboratory with narrowed, angry eyes. He was a wealthy legacy student whose family had donated millions of dollars to the prestigious school. He was supposed to be the undisputed star of the engineering program, but a poor girl with dirty fingernails was suddenly ruining his perfect future. Threatened by her rising success, Vance began a quiet, cowardly campaign to completely destroy her reputation. He whispered cruel lies to the other rich students, constantly mocking her blue-collar roots and the fact that she grew up in a dangerous, muddy scrapyard. Worse, He started turning the strict faculty members against her practical methods. He argued to the powerful professors that Lola's manual welding techniques were dangerously outdated and far too risky for a multi-million-dollar deep-sea project. He pushed the board to demand that only automated, computer-controlled robot arms could be trusted to weld the final pressure vessels. Vance smiled coldly, knowing this strict rule would perfectly trap Lola and completely erase her greatest advantage. News of Lola's incredible talent quickly spread beyond the quiet university campus. Powerful recruiters from massive aerospace and industrial companies started waiting outside her classrooms. They wore expensive suits and handed her thick folders filled with golden promises. They offered her a life of endless corporate wealth, private offices, and huge salaries. But there was a catch. They wanted her to sit behind a clean glass desk and type on a computer all day. They told her she was far too smart to ruin her hands with dirty manual labor. Lola stared at their glossy brochures, feeling a deep, uncomfortable twist in her stomach. The shiny corporate world felt like another beautiful, trapping cage. They did not understand that her calloused hands and her bright torch were her true superpowers. Giving up the physical fire meant giving up the very soul her father had passed down to her. She politely smiled at the rich men, but deep down she knew she could never trade her heavy welding hood for a tailored business suit. While Lola fought intense battles in the university laboratories, her younger sister Mavis was slowly changing the atmosphere inside the cold glass mansion. Mavis was bright, fearless, and completely unaware of Seung-Woo Lee's terrifying reputation. She began leaving colorful crayon drawings on his perfectly clean desk and asking him simple, innocent questions about his day. At first, the hardened mafia boss did not know how to react. He was used to violent men bowing in fear, not a little girl asking him to help tie her shoes. But slowly, the thick ice around his dark heart began to melt. He started joining Mavis in the massive kitchen, quietly sharing warm bowls of soup and listening to her joyful stories. Lola watched them from the hallway one evening, her heart swelling with deep emotion. The most dangerous man in the city was gently smiling at a simple joke. Mavis was bringing a pure, gentle warmth into Lee's lonely life, reminding him that there was still beautiful light outside his dark world of crime. Just weeks before the final presentation, the corrupt university board announced a devastating new rule. They declared that all deep-sea pressure vessels had to be completely sealed by automated, computer-controlled welding robots. They claimed human hands were simply too messy and unpredictable for such a critical task. Vance stood in the back of the room, smiling cruelly because he knew this rule would destroy Lola. Lola immediately marched to the front of the classroom and slammed her hands on the professor's desk. She argued fiercely that the expensive AI machines were incredibly blind. The robotic arms only followed a strict mathematical path and could never feel the tiny, hidden micro-imperfections hiding inside the exotic titanium plates. She warned them that metal is a natural element that constantly shifts under intense heat, and a blind robot could never adjust in real time. The arrogant professors completely ignored her desperate warning. They ordered her to use the robotic arms or fail the entire Capstone project, leaving her trapped in a robotic lie. The day of the final Capstone presentation brought a heavy, nervous energy to the giant testing facility. The massive room was packed with the university's wealthiest donors, strict faculty members, and serious military contractors in sharp uniforms. They were all there to witness the ultimate hydrostatic stress test, eager to see which student had designed the strongest vessel. A giant, thick glass water chamber stood in the exact center of the room, ready to crush the metal creations with unbelievable ocean pressure. Lola stood quietly by her heavy steel table, her stomach twisting with deep anxiety. Vance was called to the testing platform first. He walked proudly to the front, wearing a perfectly pressed suit and a confident, arrogant smile. His deep-sea vessel looked shiny, flawless, and completely untouched by human hands. It had been perfectly welded by the expensive robotic machines, just as the professors had demanded. Vance confidently pressed the green button, slowly lowering his glowing titanium container into the dark, threatening water chamber for the ultimate test. The heavy water chamber sealed shut, and the powerful pumps roared to life. The digital screens above the tank quickly displayed the rapidly increasing ocean pressure. Vance crossed his arms, smiling proudly at the wealthy military contractors in the front row. The pressure reached 5,000 pounds, then 10,000. The automated titanium vessel held strong at first, but suddenly a terrifying, high-pitched groaning sound echoed through the silent room. Lola immediately recognized the awful sound of dying metal. The blind robotic arms had missed a tiny micro-imperfection in the titanium seam, just as Lola had predicted. Before anyone could react, a massive, violent crack ripped through the water chamber. Vance's perfect machine-welded vessel instantly shattered into 100 jagged pieces under the crushing pressure. The wealthy crowd gasped in absolute horror, jumping back from the thick glass. Vance's confident smile completely vanished. His face turned pale with panic as he frantically yelled, blaming the testing equipment and the water pressure for his embarrassing, catastrophic failure. It was finally Lola's turn to present her deep-sea vessel. The heavy metal container was placed on the testing platform for a quick digital pre-scan. Suddenly, a loud red buzzer echoed through the giant room. The computer screen flashed a bright warning, declaring that her titanium joints were already dangerously weak. The wealthy crowd gasped and started whispering. Lola's heart sank, but her sharp instincts quickly kicked in. She rushed forward and closely inspected the silver metal seams. A sudden twist of dark realization hit her. The metal had a faint, sickly blue tint. Someone had secretly sneaked into her private lab the night before and completely altered the argon gas mixture on her welding machine. The dirty gas had poisoned the expensive titanium, completely destroying the strength of her beautiful welds. She looked up and saw Vance hiding a cruel, knowing smile. He had deliberately sabotaged her entire project because he was absolutely terrified of losing to a poor girl from the scrapyard. Before Lola could even speak, the corrupt professor quickly grabbed a microphone. He loudly announced to the shocked crowd that Lola's project was a complete disaster and a huge safety risk. Vance proudly stepped forward, agreeing with the dishonest teacher. They quickly formed a nasty trap right in the middle of the testing room. Vance cruelly told the important military guests that a simple ghetto welder was never smart enough to handle delicate, exotic alloys. He laughed and said her dirty street methods had finally ruined everything. The greedy professor officially demanded that Lola be immediately expelled from the prestigious university for wasting their expensive materials. Lola stood frozen, gripping the edge of her cold metal table. Hot tears of anger burned in her eyes as the wealthy elites shook their heads in disappointment. They were using her sabotaged project to finally push her out of their pristine world, trying to prove that a girl from the mud never truly belonged among them. In the dark shadows at the back of the room, Seung-Woo Lee watched the unfair trap unfold. His cold, calculating eyes narrowed with pure, terrifying rage. The dangerous mafia boss immediately recognized the cowardly sabotage. He pulled out his sleek black phone, ready to make a single phone call that would ruthlessly destroy Vance's wealthy family empire forever. He was fully prepared to crush them into absolute dust. But suddenly, Lola looked up and caught his dark gaze across the crowded room. She gave him a sharp, fierce shake of her head. She marched straight through the whispering crowd and stood directly in front of Lee. With a steady, brave voice, she demanded that he put the phone away immediately. She told him that if he destroyed Vance in the dark shadows, the elite world would never respect her true skills. She refused to hide behind his dangerous power. She boldly promised Lee that she would beat them all right there on the brightly lit testing floor. The corrupt professor angrily grabbed his clipboard and loudly declared that the final exam was officially over. He told everyone to pack up and go home because the robotic machines were broken and Lola's vessel was ruined. Lola firmly planted her heavy work boots on the shiny floor and loudly refused to leave. Her strong voice echoed off the high ceiling, instantly silencing the entire room. She pointed at the broken automated arms and boldly told the military contractors that blind robots were useless in the real world. She demanded that the university board immediately bring her a fresh set of raw titanium plates. Then, she reached under her heavy workbench and pulled out her father's battered leather welding bag. It was filled with her personal heavy-duty gear from the dirty industrial yard. The wealthy donors gasped in absolute shock as she loudly challenged the arrogant professors, daring them to let her prove exactly what human hands could do. The shocked billionaires, military generals, and a suddenly terrified Vance watched in absolute silence. Lola confidently stood in the exact center of the massive room, surrounded by thick titanium plates. She strapped on her heavy leather apron and pulled her father's battered, dark welding hood over her face. She picked up her manual TIG welding torch and fired it up. A blindingly intense blue light exploded in the pristine laboratory. Lola completely tuned out the quiet whispers and the extreme pressure of the wealthy crowd. She moved her steady hands with beautiful, flawless precision, melting the difficult, exotic metal together. She was performing the legendary Jackson weave, a deeply complex technique that arrogant engineers considered mathematically impossible for any human to do. The intense heat blasted her protective gear, but she did not flinch. She fused the thick titanium joints perfectly, pouring her father's brilliant legacy and all her hard-earned street survival directly into the glowing, unbreakable steel seam. The heavy crane carefully lowered Lola's hand-welded titanium vessel into the dark water chamber. The entire room held its breath as the thick glass doors sealed shut. The powerful pumps roared to life, pushing the water pressure higher and higher. The digital numbers on the giant screen quickly climbed past 5,000 pounds, then 10,000. Vance wiped nervous sweat from his forehead, waiting for the metal to crack. But the vessel did not make a single sound. The pressure blasted past the expected failure point. It easily passed the highest military standard, reaching a level that no computer thought was physically possible. The silent military generals leaned forward in absolute shock, staring at the perfect, glowing silver seams. The testing machine finally maxed out and shut down, completely unable to break Lola's masterpiece. The titanium joint did not have a single microfracture. The unbreakable Jackson weave had survived the crushing depths, and proving that true strength was forged by human hands, not blind machines. A stunned, heavy silence filled the massive laboratory. Then, a towering military general slowly stood up and began to clap his hands. Within seconds, the entire room of wealthy billionaires, strict professors, and elite donors rose to their feet, erupting into deafening applause. They were forced to respect the brilliant girl with the dirty work boots. Vance stumbled backward, his face completely pale with shock and deep embarrassment. The corrupt professor tried to hide in the shadows, but the military contractors demanded an immediate investigation into the clear sabotage. By the end of the week, Vance was officially expelled in total disgrace, completely ruining his wealthy family's proud legacy. The power dynamic in the prestigious university permanently flipped. The arrogant students who had once mocked Lola now stepped aside when she walked down the bright hallways. She had publicly humbled the elite world, proving that raw, street-level grit and honest survival could easily crush their hollow, unearned privilege. On graduation day, Lola stood proudly at the top of her class, holding her hard-earned engineering degree. Her incredible victory had attracted the attention of every major industrial giant in the country. Men in expensive suits flooded her phone with massive corporate job offers, promising her millions of dollars to sit in a quiet, air-conditioned office. They offered her a safe, perfectly organized life behind a polished glass desk. But Lola looked at her calloused hands and remembered the fiery sparks of the dirty industrial yard. She politely but firmly turned down every single corporate offer. She knew she was simply not meant to be trapped inside a boring cubicle, staring at abstract numbers on a computer screen all day. She needed to feel the intense heat of the torch and the heavy weight of the steel. She wanted to build real things that mattered. Lola packed up her father's battered welding hood, fully ready to forge her own unique path outside the cold corporate world. With the quiet, powerful financial backing of Seung-Woo Lee, Lola opened the Obsidian Forge. It was a massive, high-end structural fabrication firm located right on the edge of the shining coastal city. It was not a quiet laboratory, but a roaring, fiery workshop of incredible innovation. Instead of hiring wealthy university graduates, Lola drove back to her old, struggling neighborhood. She hired the tough, overlooked blue-collar kids who were desperate for a real chance. She brought them into her massive shop and taught them the legendary Jackson weave. Together, they perfectly blended elite, advanced metallurgical science with pure, street-level grit. The Obsidian Forge quickly became the most famous custom metal shop in the entire country. Wealthy billionaires and powerful military leaders waited in long lines just to get their projects built by Lola's team. She had successfully bridged the massive gap between the muddy scrapyard and the pristine elite world, creating a beautiful place where hard work truly mattered. Many years later, the Obsidian Forge was chosen for an incredibly dangerous and highly controversial project. Lola's firm was contracted to build the secure structural framework for a massive international embassy in a divided country. During the intense construction, powerful foreign leaders tried to bribe and intimidate her, but Lola's unshakable integrity and brilliant, sharp mind completely outsmarted them at every turn. With Seung-Woo Lee still quietly guarding her from the dark shadows, she flawlessly completed the impossible building. The foreign leaders were so deeply impressed by her incredible honesty and problem-solving skills that they asked her to stay and help negotiate their complex trade treaties. The tough girl from the muddy scrapyard had officially transformed from a master welder into a highly respected global diplomat. She stood proudly in front of the shining embassy, proving to the entire world that a brilliant mind forged in the hottest fire could truly build a better, stronger future. And that brings us to the end of Lola's incredible journey. The story of the Obsidian Forge leaves us with a powerful lesson. True strength is forged by human hands, not blind machines. Lola taught us that your background, no matter how messy or difficult, is your greatest weapon. She proved to the entire world that raw, street-level grit and honest survival can easily crush hollow, unearned privilege. Remember, never let the world force you into a beautiful, trapping cage, and never trade your true superpower just to fit in. Stay true to your roots, because a brilliant mind forged in the hottest fire can truly build a better, stronger future. What was your favorite moment from Lola and Lee's story? Let us know down in the comments. If you were inspired by Lola's unbreakable spirit, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and make sure to subscribe to Afro K Mafia Diary for more epic stories. Thanks for watching.